Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may be tuning in from. Welcome to the first series of the Hague Institute for Global Justice's Roundtable discussion. We are delighted to have you here. My name is Abdulla Abu Wasel, and I will be your presenter today. Today's discussion will be on the role of civil society in the future space enterprise. This roundtable will be the inauguration and the first phase of the Institute's space program, and we are honored to be the first international non-governmental institute to launch a space program. It is a pleasure to be joined by our keynote speakers for today's discussion, Mr. Kenneth Hodgkins, the president of the International Space Enterprises Consultants, U.S. Representative to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and an honorary senior advisor of the Hague Institute for Global Justice. With him will be Dr. Sergio Camacho, the Secretary General of the Regional Center for Space Science and Technology Education for Latin America and Caribbean, and the former director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. Also, we will have Mr. Dan Dumbacher, who is the Executive Director of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And last but not least, Mr. Jean-Jacques Tortora, the Director of the European Space Policy Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce, first of all, Mr. Kenneth Hodgkins. But before we do that, this event will be split up into two sessions. The first session is composed of a 15-minute presentation by each keynote speaker, whilst the second session consists of an open, in-depth roundtable discussion between the keynote speakers on the role of civil society in the future space enterprise. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Kenneth Hodgkins.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. It's a great pleasure to be here for this inaugural event. And I'm really excited about the possibility of creating what I consider to be a unique platform for considering all aspects of the role of civil society in the future space enterprise. And secondly, this is the first international non-governmental organization dealing with space established since, I think, probably the 1960s. So we have a real opportunity here to discuss issues of importance, but also to start laying the foundation for a sustained program within the Hague Institute for Global Justice. The journey to space begins well before launch, and the Hague Institute is committed to be an advocate for building the future superhighway to space, the moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies. The superhighway is a technological, economic, and legal continuum with decision points creating new unanticipated opportunities. And the Institute will be there to assist international civil society in making these informed decisions and to provide information to decision makers. When I was first approached by Abdullah and Lady Sohair Salam a year ago now, we discussed the idea of how do we merge an existing platform such as the Institute for Global Justice with the idea that space as a with the idea that space as a tool for social justice could be discussed. What we're going to do is seek to work with partners and stakeholders to accelerate, the global architecture for governing new and innovative commercial ventures. Space systems are vital to stability, strategic, economic, scientific discovery, and the betterment of the human condition. And decision makers would benefit enormously from a sustained and focused multidisciplinary examination of the current state of affairs in space law and policy, and the ways and means for civil society to mold the future of space utilization. What we also want to do today is take advantage of what I've just discussed and receive feedback from those of you who are watching on what are the potential areas for discussion within the Hague Institute and opportunities for collaboration between governments as well as non-governmental entities, including scientific entities and the commercial sector. The role of civil society is crucial in the space enterprise. What we need is a transparent, predictable, and equal international framework that incorporates domestic laws and regulations, as well as the existing international regime under the UN treaties and non-binding principles. But in order for the future space enterprise to flourish, we have to look at what other instruments might be necessary for the space enterprise. How do we accelerate the global space economy? How do we incorporate, before decisions are made by governments, views from the private sector? My experience has been that the governments are 10 or maybe 12 steps behind technological development. And as a result, while the technologies and new ventures take place, the government is still deciding how it might regulate that, which creates a huge amount of uncertainty for private sector. So for example, someone wanting to orbit a hotel in space under private auspices. What are the regulations for that? Who will provide the authorization and supervision under the outer space treaties? Are there international issues that need to be looked at? A venture capitalist looking at new concepts can't wait for the government to decide. So we can use this platform, and today again is the kickoff for that, to stimulate thought not only within the civil society, and I use civil society writ large, which includes commercial, scientific, government, stakeholders that use space but may not know that in fact they're using space. And so it's very important for us to set the agenda, look at what can be done in order to, as I say, accelerate the global space enterprise and provide a framework within which it could flourish. Now, what is it that we want to do? We want to include the civil society, and we want to come up with a list of issues that we can be looking at on a multidisciplinary basis. And again, this is going to be a rather unique approach that we'll be taking at The Hague in looking at this as I say, in a multidisciplinary fashion. So what would be some of these areas that we could consider? We would look at law and policy. Are the existing instruments we have in place sufficient to incorporate all of the new ventures that we see happening out over the horizon? Again, in my experience, when an entity or person comes in and asks, I want to do X, am I able to do that? For example, I want to go to an asteroid and bring back platinum. And there are three answers that you can give to that question. The first one is yes, of course you can, which is the best answer of all. The second answer is no, you can't. And of course, the reaction would be, all right, how do we fix that? But the third and the worst answer is, I just don't know. And I've been placed in that situation on several occasions on new ventures that don't quite fit into domestic regulations or perhaps even the international law. So what we would like to do is look at those and say, oh, here are the things that we see happening over the horizon. What is it that we need to do? We also want to look at mass media. Now, mass media plays a huge role in our society globally. Obviously, things like Star Trek, Star Wars, a whole variety of entertainment value media is out there. But we should be looking at what role does the mass media play, and how do we incorporate that into accelerating the global space economy? I mean, are there things that we could do in that regard? And so we have a platform with The Hague to take a look at that. We want to create a culture of entrepreneurship, having examples of young entrepreneurs and what it took for them to go from the original concept all the way to launch, if you will. And there we could share experiences among the smaller companies that are doing innovative things as well as the larger companies. We want to stimulate the next generation of space actors. And how might we do that in a multidisciplinary way? We'd like to also provide models for new space actors, a country that may be thinking about creating a space agency. What does that take? What kind of domestic regulations do they need? What are the things that need to be looked at? Of course, we've done this in the UN, and we would also draw on the experiences that we've all had within the UN system, as well as the work that's been done within the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. We want to also maintain stability in space, or sustainability in space, using space for sustainable development on Earth and supporting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I can say my analysis, 16 of those 17 goals cannot be achieved without the use of space systems in one form or another. Another idea that we've had is insurance. Our insurance companies now have a fairly good handle on insuring launch and insuring telecommunication satellites. Perhaps we need to look at what would it take to insure an orbiting hotel, or what would it take to insure private operations on the moon. This may not happen in our lifetime, perhaps, but it is worth looking at, because if people, again, are investing money in new concepts, they need some kind of certainty that when the time comes to do something significant, they have the backing of the government. We would look obviously at space mining and manufacturing, another very interesting concept. Promoting STEM would be another area, and new forms for space finance, which I think would be another interesting, another interesting area for examination. Now, with all of this said, in my view, The Hague would be a prime opportunity or prime platform to work on a shared vision for the future of the space enterprise. Now, this isn't to say that we come up with new international treaties or that we replace the other avenues for promoting international cooperation in space, but having a regular sustained platform and having all the stakeholders in space moving towards a shared vision. It doesn't have to be at the exclusion of other, as I say, of other activities going on, but this could also be something that would contribute to what governments see as the future of space. So how do we do that? The shared vision should be bottom up, should not be top down. This shared vision should include transparency, predictability, the free flow of information and ideas. These are basic things, but again, wrapping them up in a shared vision that is informed by regular discussion within The Hague, it would be enormously useful. Governance, domestic as well as international. Capacity building. What do we need to do to make sure that we have the capacity of these new young people getting into the space sciences and technologies? Resiliency, the whole notion that systems can complement one another. So if one system goes down, they're able to use another one. We have this in the area of global navigation satellite systems, where we have the operators from China, Russia, the United States, the European Union, Japan, and India, all sharing two common civil signals coming from all of those satellites. So if one system goes down, you still have the ability to use position, navigation, and timing. So resiliency is another aspect of this. Interoperability, the ability of different systems to work together so users don't have to buy unique equipment to take advantage of each and every new system that is in orbit. I've mentioned the sustainability of space. This has to continue to be our shared vision. Support for the sustainable development goals. The safe and responsible use of space needs to be, again, a fundamental tenet of this shared vision for the future, and having a level playing field that promotes the acceleration of the global space economy. This can be the level playing field. I know is a sensitive trade issue, but I do think there are things that we could discuss within the Hague context on what it takes to have a level playing field. Supporting youth and the next generation of young people getting into the space sciences, and then the culture of entrepreneurship, which is at the heart, in my view, of the future global space enterprise. So with those remarks, I just want to again thank you all for joining us today, and emphasize once again that this is our first foray into what I consider to be a new and exciting approach to space and to the global space enterprise. We really would like very much your feedback. And now what I'd like to turn it over to Sergio Camacho. So the floor is yours, Sergio. Thank you.
Sergio, you might be muted. I don't know. There we go.
Yes, I apologize. I was muted.
No worries.
I would like to begin by thanking Ken for the introduction, and the Hague Institute for Global Justice for the opportunity to participate in this very exciting first roundtable, where we will be looking at some of the issues that were already outlined by Ken. He provided a very large view on it. I am not going to cover in my talk all those points, but I will cover some of those points. And I wonder if I might have the slides that okay. Not my slides, but I think it was the content has been transferred by Abdullah. Thank you very much, Abdullah, for this. Well, one thing that I think we're not all very conscious of, or completely conscious, is that just about everything that we do in our daily life, whatever we do throughout the day, is either directly or indirectly affected by activities that take place in outer space. Now, these go from going to the bank and being able to do a transaction, which very often we just do from home, and the timing that's necessary for that transaction to take place, that is dependent on the GNSS satellites, but we don't have to know that. It affects our life. If it works, the internet itself, if it works, we're happy. If it doesn't work, we don't really know whose fault it is, and we complain and think, this technology, and we never really put a name to that technology. Where is that technology coming from? What is it that we're using? And like this, there are many, many. I just mentioned one, but think of anything that you do throughout the day and see, think about whether it is affected by outer space activities. Now, I'm going to concentrate on how can civil society actually participate. Can we go to the previous one? How can civil society participate in the governance of outer space activities? That is, how can civil society have a voice in what, how we protect or how we use outer space, and how we reach maybe a level playing field for everybody, regardless of what their level of technology development might be. And first, I would ask, I ask myself, well, who is civil society? In my view, it includes academia, universities, institutes, specialized NGOs, those that are dedicated to some aspect of space activity. Mentioned there the Space Generation Advisory Council. They're promoting the participation of young people in space activities and doing a lot of other things, but they are a dedicated NGO to space. Other NGOs either use or depend on or are concerned about or with space aspects. The Hague Institute for Global Justice, the Project Plowshares, for those of you who might be familiar, work in various areas, but one of the areas is related to space. Others are professional societies. This is where the practitioners work and exchange ideas and needs. ISPRS, the IAF, the IAG, these are all societies that use some aspect of space in their work and should have a voice. And then there are hybrid organizations that include government representatives and NGO representatives. Here I have in mind one of them, and I'll mention it more about it a little later, is the International Committee on GNSS. It's a group of providers, we call them providers of the possibility of having GNSS systems, and the GNSS systems working without interfering with each other. And then there's the general public. And if I may have the next one, Abdullah. Now, how do we give a role to civil society in decision making? First, we need to create or raise awareness of the issues on which decision making is happening, or where it should be happening. Some of these issues can mention all of them, as all the ones that I have, in which there is some decision making that is needed, include space debris, commercialization of space, and protection of space assets, and the list goes on. So some decision making is taking place, but not enough. There's more decision making that is needed, and this is where civil society should be able to contribute and have a say into what the governance of activities in outer space will be related to any of these issues. Then we need to identify which the domain where these actors work, where they have either an impact, a dependency, or where they should be able to uh, have a voice in what is going to happen or should happen. Civil society, which uses, I have an example only there, space applications for the sustainable development goals. That is a big concern, or should be a big concern for either the private sector, the government sector, or other parts of civil society, because we want to reach those goals and we want to use space for supporting and reaching some of these goals. I also believe that it's probably all the SDGs except for SDG 17. The others depend in one way or another, or can not depend, can be supported by space activities. Now, it could also be government. Government is responsible for national legislation. If we're going to have rules that apply to my country's activities, whether they're private or government, then I need to promote this national legislation. If we don't have it, then we have to develop it. But that's the realm of government. And then there's military, which are issues of national security. But they are responsible for taking decisions on what happens or doesn't happen related to space activities. We need to propose mechanisms and fora to analyze issues and make recommendations that will be, here the emphasis should be on what will be considered by decision makers in government and in the private sector. We have a lot of workshops that make recommendations, but no one is actually responsible to consider. No one has committed to consider those recommendations and make a decision. It's good, it's bad. We're going to ignore it, whatever it might be, but at least to have it considered. Now, here's a very good example, I think. The way the International Committee on GNSS works is the government representatives that provide the systems, GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, Beidou, the 4 global systems, and the 2 regional systems also provided by India and by Japan. They take the decisions, but there are associate members that are the large users. These include some of those professional associations that I listed in a previous slide. And they bring their voice and they say, this is what we need. And then the governments are the ones who decide, yes, we take it, we don't take it. But they are considered. And I think we need more platforms in which there would be a commitment to listen to those that have knowledge and something to consider, contribute in the governance, regarding the governance of space activities. May I have the next one, please? I wanted to give an example of the private sector participating in space, how we have been working here in Mexico from my regional center where I work. It's not mine, it's a regional Center for Space Science and Technology Education, Latin America and the Caribbean, National Institute for Astrophysics, Optics and Electronics, and a mainly another university, UPIP, we had an idea to propose that the private sector invest in space activities in the area, geographic area where we are. This may grow. Eventually, we hope to cover other parts of the country. We started by raising awareness of government at the level of the state of Puebla, which is where I'm located right now, of the economic benefits that would come from having the private sector being involved. Then, as happens and should happen, there are collaborations that come about when you have common interest. And it was serendipitous, but it turned out that the space enterprise, Ken Hodgkins, was at the time advising Virgin Galactic as to how to open markets in emerging economies. And that presented the possibility of collaboration between Virgin Galactic and the private sector around Puebla, if we could get that that interest conveyed to the private sector. But they would ask, okay, that seems fine, but what is the support that the government of the state might have? So we needed to raise awareness there, raised awareness with other universities, and started to raise awareness with Mexican companies. Now, for Mexican companies, something that would be very attractive would be able to work with Virgin Galactic or other companies that already have experience, and there can be collaboration where, well, both need to work, benefit, of course, but it's something that for private sector in an emerging economy becomes very attractive to work with an experienced counterpart. Right now, we're waiting for a reply from Virgin Galactic. They haven't replied to comments that were made by Inaue. But in the meantime, one of the companies, Mexican company, is ready to invest in space activities with or without having collaboration with Virgin Galactic. And I think that's fantastic, because they see the potential in space. And this is not a very small company. It has 200 employees, and they invest in space. And may have the last one, I think, I'm just about. Okay, and so that was an example, but there is work that is going on related to space government. There's a lot of work that is going on, and that we need to pay attention to, learn from, try to integrate, bring together some of the ideas and some of the experts that work in different forums. So I just wanted to mention, I had mentioned already the project Plowshares at a workshop from safety to security, extending north and outer space. These were the high-level recommendations that were made. Adopt an inclusive approach. Don't exclude anyone. Sustain existing norms. Enhance transparency. Use existing and advanced new mechanisms to promote safe and transparent practices by military space operations. This was something that we identified as not having enough transparency. The rest of the space community has very low information of what's happening. So even though that falls in the realm of national security, there should be some information and some exchange of information that is possible, that would create conditions to trust each other as to what is being done and what can be done. And then understand the limitations. One of the limitations would be, I cannot tell you what I'm doing either because I have commercial interests or because I have national security interests or scientific interests. And that's something that we need to understand and work with. And I want to finish by saying the roundtable that that we're having right now is a first step, I think, into providing a platform that will not be the only platform, but that could accumulate a number or bring together a number of participants from some of the other work that is being done, and to have an exchange of ideas and start finding common ground, and especially how do we get this to the level of the decision makers so that they can act on it. And those decision makers are usually government or industry. It's the CEOs. We have to get things up to the CEOs, and government levels, we need to get it into the foreign policy making of governments. And thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to my colleagues' presentations and eventually to that discussion that we will have in the roundtable. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Sergio. So I'd like to turn things over to Dan Dumbacher. The floor is yours, Dan.
All righty. Well, thank you, Ken. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. I'm Dan Dumbacher, the Executive Director of AIAA, and I want to thank the Hague Institute for Global Justice for inviting me to join this important roundtable discussion today. It's quite an honor to be here with Ken, Sergio, Jean-Jacques, and the Hague Institute team led by President Lady Sohair Salam and Abdulla Wasel. And I look forward to the future discussions in person one day, not too far down the road. Why do we explore space? Humans have always been driven to explore and push boundaries and develop the new economic opportunities. Expanding the human neighborhood, as I call it, beyond low Earth orbit and further beyond is the next horizon. Space investments have grown exponentially in the past 5 years or so. For example, the small satellites making imaging and sensing from space more accessible to new markets such as agriculture, construction, insurance, and others, along with the efforts of people thinking in terms of mining asteroids and getting involved with and building a lunar economy as we learn to stay and return to the moon. NASA and its international partners are now investing heavily in the Artemis program to return humans to the moon to stay and then go on to Mars. These investments, along with the commercial investments in space transportation and utilization of space, provide the infrastructure needed to begin thinking about long-term space settlement. And now is the time to start that thinking and to continue and to enhance those discussions about what it will be like to live and work on another planet or in space. Questions to be answered. What needs to be done to extend the human neighborhood to space? What are the challenges? What skills and capabilities need to be included? How and when do people need to get involved? AIAA, as a professional society and our 30,000 members, is committed to shaping the future of aerospace, and we see this as a bold future that we all will experience together. AIAA sees its role as helping lead humanity beyond planet Earth, thus extending the human neighborhood, defining the next century of flight, and creating that world we all dream of achieving. Now, we do this by helping connect people, ideas, and resources, advancing the career journeys of our members and all the professionals that will make the future a reality, and building the technical agility and cohesion in the industry, as well as establishing the communities needed to solve the critical issues for extending the human neighborhood and going beyond planet Earth. And as Sergio has talked about, the need for these discussions, the need to to inform the key decisions that are ahead and to solve the critical issues is what's needed now more than ever as we build this capability looking to the future. Now, at AIAA, we do things through all kinds of different forms. We view ourselves shaping the future of aerospace with our continuing education, with publishing the books, the journals, the technical papers. And there are many examples that you can see on our website. The most important way we do this is shaping the future for this discussion of civil society in space, is addressing the needs through the conferences and the forums. And the most relevant example for AIAA in today's conversation is the AIAA forum called Ascend. Now, why do we call it Ascend? It's named that way to, quote, accelerate space, commerce, exploration, and new discovery. And we created Ascend to help guide us to our off-world future. Ascend is meant to be very inclusive, hands-on, and most importantly, outcome-oriented. We believe it's important that we drive outcomes, we drive discussions that are tangible, that will lead to the next step so that we continue to make progress. And we believe in doing this by bringing the whole space ecosystem together to strengthen the relationships that will make the future of space happen. This ecosystem includes today's topic on the civil society, along with all of the commercial, government, and academic players that are part of building this future. AIAA, we purposely, for Ascend, we established a guiding coalition to represent the highest levels of the technical, scientific, and engineering leadership across the government, industry, military, and academia. Members of this guiding coalition play the active role in crafting and championing Ascend to maximize its global reach and impact, assuring AIAA addresses the future vision of building our off-world future, addressing the needs and driving outcomes and progress toward the goals of building our off-world future. Now, this guiding coalition has membership from academia, government, industry. It's led by Rob Meyerson, former president of Blue Origin. We have membership such as Wanda Segur from the National Academies, Ellen Stofan from the Smithsonian Institution, and many others. I won't go through the entire list because it's impressive and it's long. Ascend 2020 was our first inaugural event, and yes, we learned a lot doing things online during the pandemic. But more importantly, Ascend addressed the key opportunities and issues with more than 6,000 people engaged across all of the Ascend events. And to highlight and to tie in with one of Sergio's key points, we had an Ascend event on developing an economically viable lunar settlement. What would that look like? And in that, from that workshop, we developed a report that was actually led by students, graduate students primarily, that looked at what were the examples, how can we leverage the community, what are the tangible products that are needed, and then they developed white papers and presentations that were taken to and used by the United States congressional staff and also the National Space Council in the United States. The key takeaways that they carried to the decision makers included discussions on the government's role and interest as a starting point for space exploration and lunar settlement. The successful lunar settlement and operations will hinge on traditional market-driven principles. The role of the government should become limited as settlement becomes established. Successful lunar settlement will fuel and be driven by innovation. And a very key point, that diversity of all kinds will create the best chance for success as we build our off-world future. We also had additional conversations on NASA's plan for sustained lunar exploration and development. We gathered a panel of experts that included company representatives, academic perspective, as well as former practitioners in private industry. And this collaborative workshop had over 200 attendees with academic institutions, the commercial enterprises, professional societies, and government agencies from around the world. And that too had provided some key insights that have been provided to decision makers along the way. We had over 3,000 people attend the Ascend event last November online. There were 33 countries. And it was quite a mix and quite an energetic conversation, even though it was online. And some of the key takeaways fell in the form of the distinct nature of this discussion that Ascend provided, a forum where we could ask the big questions of where are we headed in space, where are we headed as a civil society, and making the point that space exploration is open to everyone, recognizing that there are upfront costs that need to be addressed. Space commercialization and settlement will be and must be an international endeavor. We had other Ascend events that discussed space policy and education, space science and technology, national security space, all to touch on and to address key issues in those respective sectors. Ascend, along with all those workshops, the webinars, and other opportunities that AIAA is working on to bring together the space community, we use this to create the actionable steps, or an on-ramp to space, as we call it, in order to build this future. We also recognize that this future must be collaborative. It takes all of us. It is the future for global society, that space become more important in our daily lives and future economic growth. And Sergio pointed out right off the bat how important it is today, and it will grow ever more important as we proceed through time. We even though our vision looks to the stars and how we can build that off-world future, we base our experience on 5 fundamentals that we believe are key to everyone's success in space. Number 1 are the partnerships. Bring the leaders, bring the innovators, bring the influencers, bring the decision makers together so that we can have the needed discussions and determine what the next step should be. Bring the projects together to wholly integrate the systems and address the big ideas and search out for the big ideas and build towards the big ideas. We actually do a little bit of process to make sure we solve the problems and build confidence along the way that we are taking the right steps at the right time, and addressing the policies. What laws, legislation, and regulations are needed to encourage the innovation and eliminate the barriers to progress. This is our passion for the long haul future, and it is something that we are working towards every single day. International cooperation is absolutely key throughout this whole endeavor. So as part of that, in recognition of that key element, we have had international panels featuring the national agency leaders from Germany, France, India, and Japan to talk about the capabilities needed to advance the knowledge for humanity, how these investments are being applied to problems, particularly in the post-COVID challenges across the globe. how we need to partner across the spectrum with other national agencies, commercial entities, non-government organizations, and private companies, and what we need to do for the future. So also addressing this multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary adjacent industries and bring the new players that are needed from a technical and market perspective from the many different disciplines into this discussion. And that is another key reason why AIAA created Ascend, to drive the outcome in this transdisciplinary platform. And we're bringing everyone together. It's not just the scientists and the engineers. It includes the economists, the medical professionals, the educators, legal professionals, artists, investors, and entrepreneurs, all together to network, share the ideas, and develop the needed solutions. We're working to attract the adjacent industries such as space tourism, the biomed research, infrastructure, communications, and technology. So all of this is important. We have our next event coming up in November, mid-November. So please feel free to join us. And we have much more information coming, and we can talk about it more in the future, as well as another key element that we are working to address at AIAA is the workforce of the future. What does that next generation workforce need to do? How can we help them be prepared for that future? We've had recent workshops that have actually resulted in articles that talk about some of the 4 or 5 new jobs, the interdisciplinary generalist, or the space MacGyver, as some people call it, the artist, the social architect. We even got into a discussion about lunar and Martian brewers, if anybody's interested in beer at the right place at the right time. So all of this is important. We do not do this alone. This is a global enterprise, and that discussions such as this that Ken and company have pulled together, and the Hague Institute for Global Justice have pulled together, are key ways to bring the creative and open-minded people together to work on what we need to build for the future. We see this as key to expanding the involvement and building the future. Spaces for everyone, and professional societies such as AIAA are here to help build that community. And we look forward to working with the Hague Institute for Global Justice and others to build this future and to participate in events such as this to help make the future happen. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ken. Thank you everyone for your attention, and I very much look forward to the roundtable discussion.
Thank you, Dan. So our last panelist, Jean-Jacques Tortora, I will give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody, regardless where you are at the moment. So I'm Jean-Jacques Tortora. I'm director of the European Space Policy Institute, which is one of its kind independent think tank that aims at providing European decision makers with informed views on multiple issues related to the further development of the European space sector. And I would like to thank very much the Hague Institute for Global Justice for including me. It's a pleasure and a great honor for me to contribute to this initiative, and I look forward to an exciting roundtable later on. So I will start to giving maybe a historical perspective on the evolution of the space sector globally, because actually this sector is under deep transformation. It has been quite stable since the pioneering era back in the 60s. And it has been very stable until recently, until the last few years. And what has really changed here is that space has become accessible to more private and more public actors because of the maturation of a number of space technologies. And this has some consequences on the international setup. that we have applied and that we have defined for the space sector back in the 60s. Because all this legal framework has been inherited from this pioneering era. I will not come back to, I would say, the very brilliant description that Sergio gave of the current setup. So mostly organized around the United Nations, COPUOS on one hand for the peaceful use of outer space, and the Conference of Disarmament for military applications, which has, I would say, not progressed very much since its inception. And when it comes to implementation, it's up to sovereign states to include and to translate in their national legislations all the provisions that are discussed and agreed upon in the UN framework. Just a slight comment I would like to make is that this whole setup has been really meant to minimize the constraints and to favor freedom of action in space. And I guess that it was quite effective, but I would like also to stress, along what Sergio just also said, that that civil society has not been included in this setup, and at the moment, representative of civil society, would it be NGOs or organizations, private organizations, are at best observers in the committees of the UN. But as I said, this setup has been very effective, and actually it allowed the space sector to grow. And today, the number of applications is expanding at a very high speed, to the extent that now space data or space data delivered by satellites are used for a number of public, of commercial services, both for navigation or positioning, Earth observation, remote sensing, telecommunications, meteorology, broadcasting, and many other applications I will not repeat. And to the extent that now most of the I would say citizens on Earth, they so daily make use of space-based services, and most often they are even unaware of that. So space has become unique and irreplaceable, and this motivates a number of initiatives at national levels to set political, to set strategic, or to set legal frameworks to actually frame the activities, the development of activities, and most often also to encourage them. And of course, this also implies that that now many more than in the early days want to have a say on the conduct of space affairs. So what this multiplication of national laws or national regulation is certainly a move in the right direction. But we must also keep in mind that all these laws deal with what is actually a shared resource. So is it a common heritage or not? I know that there is a debate at the moment among legal experts. I will not enter these debates, but this is for sure a shared resource. And what we need to define or to refine is the principles that we will apply for sharing this resource. And having a multiplication of national initiatives actually raises an issue of consistency, because actually national space policies cannot be devised in isolation. Actually, they are just piece of a broader ensemble, and we must be aware and we must account for what the others are doing. And actually, what is going on globally in space sets the boundary conditions that should be applied in the process of definition of national regulation and national legislation. So basically, the question is, how are we going to be able to jointly operate in space? So some have put forward the precedent of what we have done for the oceans, or what we have done for the share of the airspace. I believe that is not that much relevant, because actually in oceans and airspace, we had the possibility to apply segregation of traffic between military and civil, and we have national airspace, national waters, etc., which actually is not applicable in space. We are really doomed to live together. And this is one major point and one major specificity that we have in space that definitely calls for a dedicated approach. Another specificity that I would like to raise, getting back to the initial treaties, is that basically the mindset or the spirit in which these treaties have been elaborated was that space was infinite. So space is not finite. Okay, it is infinite. I'm not contradicting this fact, but the useful space for our applications is finite, and we have now come to the point where we are facing the congestion of the lower orbits, multiplication of debris, etc., etc. A number of things that were not envisioned, that were not anticipated in the initial documents, legal documents. And this has deep implications in the way we deal with space, because we do not negotiate, we do not sit around table to discuss what it is about sharing, how we are going to share an infinite resource, and how it is going to be when we need to share a finite resource. And in many respects, this is also similar to the debate which is going on environment and global warming, etc., etc. And I would say that it's not easier to address than space is not easier to address than environment. And what makes or what adds an additional layer of complexity is now the economic dimension of space. It is assessed that something like 7% of the global products depends on space infrastructure. If we narrow down the scope to just the applications related to security and defense, we must be something, I would say, closer to 80%, which is my personal assessment. And this actually proves how much space has become a critical resource that nobody anymore wants to see reserved to a handful of superpowers. So what is at stake is the need to come up with common rules that will be acceptable for the good sake of operations or smooth operations, and that will be also effective to ensure the long-term sustainability of space. And actually what we are also facing, and I will not repeat what Sergio said before me regarding the recent developments of the long-term sustainability guidelines in the framework of the COPUOS. I know that Ken, you have also been quite instrumental in this major step forward. So these guidelines are both technical, non-technical, and they are definitely a major step in the right direction and a major progress that I would like to salute. But everybody agrees also at the same time that they are not sufficient to ensure forever the sustainability of outer space. So the question is, how far will we be able to get? And the key question is, how fast are we going to be able to move forward? Because actually all this process, it's, I would say, it's a UN managed process, and actually the time frame or the schedule is not set according to any deadline or objectives. It takes the time it takes. But now we are confronted with a very effective and very quick development of a number of initiatives led by private actors. And here we have probably something to account for, because actually it's a kind of race that we will have to run between what might happen and the legal or regulatory framework that we will be able to define for that. Because another point that I would like to make regarding the commercial use of space is that once again, the treaties are not of a great help, because they do not say much about that. I will get back to what was said before me regarding the exploitation of resources. Exploitation of resources was envisioned, but actually it was not really digged into, because at the time the texts were elaborated, there was no practical or immediate application that was foreseeable. So not much is being said about the commercial use of space, and actually we are facing here a major issue related to the interpretation of the texts. Of course, all legal texts are faced with interpretation when they come to concrete application. And all our treaties do not make exception to that. But the question is, what is the way forward? Should we continue with governments and nations coming up with their interpretation translated into their national law? This is actually what the United States did recently with the enactment of the US Space Act, did a great job. This is also what Luxembourg had done on its side with their national law. They did a great job as well. But actually, there are slight nuances between these two regimes or these two interpretations. So what's the way forward? Should every single nation come up with their own interpretation? And what if they are not compatible? What if we have divergences? How will we able to cooperate in space, and especially in the framework of exploration missions, future exploration missions? How are we going to cooperate if we have a different understanding of what our basic legal documents say, and if we apply to our industries different regimes depending on their nationality? So this just to say that we need to find a convergence. And in I would say the real world, no, in other areas, this interpretation is usually ensured by the jurisprudence. But as far as space is concerned, we cannot expect or cannot rely on any kind of jurisprudence, because for having a jurisprudence, you need an authority. And we have no authority at the moment that has been defined. And I don't believe that in the foreseeable future, we will be able to get any, because actually there is an objective agreement between the superpowers that definitely privilege their freedom of action in space, that rely on their technological advance to ensure the security of their assets in space. And on the other hand, all the newcomers, and the newcomers refuse to be imposed more stringent rules than their predecessors. So actually, nobody really wants to see anything I would say binding or bringing additional constraints coming up in the near future. So we have to find a way to converge in our understanding, in our acceptation, in our interpretation of our texts. And this certainly is where I would see a lot of merits to the current initiative that have been launched by the Hague Institute for Global Justice. Because the reality is that nations have, and maybe increasingly, conflicting interests in space. And we will more and more often need to arbitrate between national priorities and common interest. And this usually is the role assigned to diplomacy. And at the moment, really, space is not on the diplomatic agenda, on the global diplomatic agenda. It might be at the agenda of some nations, but not globally. And diplomacy is a matter of give and take. It's not, I want myself to define 100% of the regime applicable to my space activities. It's, I would say, the art of compromise. We need to also understand what others want and what the other expect from space. And this is going to be a difficult task. And one of the reasons for that is that the boundaries between military and civil are getting really blurred. Now, initially, you know, at the UN, we have separated the peaceful, the COPIOS and Conference on Disarmament, so basically civil and military applications. But nowadays, the technologies are the same, the players are the same, and sometimes even the programs are the same. We could take the example of GPS, a 100% military program, extensively used by civil and for civil applications. We could take Galileo, which is a civil program, which also has military applications. And this is the case of all the public-private arrangements, or partnerships or arrangements, where some private operators are awarded the role of operating infrastructure that have a lot of security or defense-related applications. So I would like to conclude on this, just to repeat once again that at this point in time, what we really urgently need is that space gains political attention and support. And for that, we need to reach out to a wider audience. We need to raise awareness and to gauge engagement of civil society. Thank you very much.
That was an absolutely thrilling session, I must say. I mean, it is a pleasure to hear all of you speak. And all of you have such diverse ideas on the role of civil society in the future space enterprise, but they're all aligned in their thinking. So now it's time for the roundtable discussion. Now, during the roundtable discussion, I will be posing 7 questions to all of you, and all of you will have 10 minutes to respond for an open, informal, and in-depth discussion. Now, at the conclusion of the roundtable, I'll catch up with everyone. But for now, we're going to start with the first question, that being, it is often touted that decision makers would benefit enormously from a sustained and focused multidisciplinary examination of the current state of affairs in space law and policy, and the ways and means for civil society to mold the future of space utilization. Do you believe that this is accurate? And if so, what benefits and developments could come from a decision maker's examination of such affairs? Ken, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Abdulla. Well, first of all, what I'd like to point out is that we have a panel of what I would call reformed bureaucrats, because all 4 of us have worked in either the bureaucracy at the UN level, Sergio, or Jean-Jacques working for Kenneth, Dan working for NASA, and myself working for the State Department. So for us to move from wanting to be controlling everything from a government standpoint to now advocate civil society is quite a testament to whatever therapy it was that we all 4 of us went to. But this is the fundamental question. Is, first of all, yes, the answer is we do need informed decisions by our decision makers based on a wider universe of views. We all know, working within, again, the bureaucracy, you have competing views within the bureaucracy. and they think they know everything. And therefore, what comes out of that process is the word. And that's not necessarily the case today. It might have been decades ago when the world was simpler during the Cold War, and we had a handful of countries active in space. But now with the new issues that are facing us, the new actors in space, the decision makers really need a different approach. And that approach is not, in the case of the United States, individual companies going to Congress, or in this case, going to NASA, wanting specific things from them, but not caring about whether anybody else in the space community gets them. So it's like a function of, I get the money from Congress that I need for a rocket that NASA doesn't want to build, but we're going to make them do that. That's not, in my view, the role of civil society as we're talking about it today. The role of civil society is taking a very reasoned and serious look at a issue or number of issues that might intersect, study that, and come to conclusions that can be tailored to whatever decision makers that you're dealing with, whether it's the foreign policy apparatus or the military apparatus, or foreign ministries of economics or the space agencies. And so the benefits of having early input from civil society, in my view, would be enormous. But this takes a lot of work on the part of the governments, and it's going to take what would be the word? A cultural change. And as Dan was putting it, the neighborhood of space. And I would say the neighborhood of space on Earth is civil society and the decision makers getting together. So anyways, that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Ken. And Dan, your thoughts on the matter?
My thoughts on the matter are going to be similar to Ken's, but I'm going to come at it from a little bit different direction, in the sense that I'm a firm believer, because I've had it borne out by experience, that multidisciplinary examination of any issue, of any question, is appropriate. Making sure you have the different perspectives that are stakeholders in the problem or stakeholders in the issue involved is harder on the front end, but it's easier on the back end when it comes to implementation and being able to accomplish things. Now, to take that one level lower, there's also the aspect that these decisions all have implications. They affect different parts of the global ecosystem, so to speak, or in this case, the space ecosystem. And no one individual, no one group is all-knowing and can come up with all the answers. What I think is important is we also make sure that we include the scientific and technical perspectives, so that we have a better understanding of what the implications can be, what is actually doable and achievable, what can actually be accomplished with today's technology or with today's technical capabilities. And also, and maybe even more important in some respects, is a scientific or technical understanding of what some of the implications may be, and how those implications will play out and affect different stakeholders of civil society. No one from one country or another can truly understand what the stakeholders in another country are dealing with. And we need to understand those implications. So that means we need to bring forth the different perspectives, the multidisciplinary approach that includes the policy, the business, the finance, the governments, the technical wherewithal to be able to do that. And I think the benefits of that will be more informed decisions, better decisions for the global community.
Thank you so much, Dan. Jean-Jacques.
Yes, oh, certainly I will not disagree with anything said before me by Ken or Dan. I think that yes, the decision makers must get an informed views on what's at stake in space, because as I said in my initial statement, space is not anymore a purely, I would say, institutional or strategic area. It has a lot of implications in the civil society, which are very difficult to assess, actually, or to measure. I know that there are a number of studies related to the development of the space economy, but actually there is much more at stake than the addition of the turnover made by the various companies active in space. For instance, how do you assess the economic impact of meteorology, for instance? It's something which is very difficult to make, and this is now the vision that we should have about space. And as Dan said, we must understand that we all rely on space, and we have to develop and to increase the mutual understanding. Mutual understanding is definitely a prerequisite before envisaging any kind of consensus or convergence, at least convergence. And we must also agree on or change the vision that we have of space. We must increasingly now see space as a resource. What I'm going to say is a bit naive, but maybe as an invaluable resource that should be used in the best interest of humankind. This is naive, I know. This is, but I would oppose this vision to a vision of space where it would be considered just as a tool for domination. And we have here the two extremes, and the truth is probably in between. And this is where actually we need to work on, to come to this common, I would say, compromise on the way we should envision space. And this requires a tremendous amount of communication, of information, to be made to the decision and policymakers.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Sergio.
Sorry, I was muted again. Well, I agree with every aspect that has been mentioned by Ken, by Dan, and Jean-Jacques. I also believe that one of the strengths of a multidisciplinary view by decision makers on any of the issues is seeing the same problem or the same issue from the interest point of view of very different actors. If we were looking at putting up a lot of satellites to provide internet connection, this is being done right now by OneWeb and SpaceX. And we had a meeting of specialists with communication technologies and small satellite technologies, formation flying, a number of fields that are related to, that would be related in making internet possible by a constellation of small satellites. You would get a certain slant on whatever outcome came and recommendations that were made to government or regulators, whether it was international or national. if you had included in that group astronomers, they would have said you are ruining the scientific possibilities that we have been developing, possibilities to explore the universe and the value that that has to not just human knowledge, but science that later is spun off and turns into technology by contaminating our medium of work. So you would have a counterbalance. Now, what the outcome would be, I don't know. But it would be recognizing that there is more than one way of looking at an issue. So I think having a multidisciplinary view, or the possibility of having that multidisciplinary view, would be very useful for decision makers. And one other point that I would like to make in this context, and I think it will apply for several of the discussions that we might be having, at least the way I see it, is the professionals in any one of the disciplines dedicate their lives to that. That is what they do on a daily basis. So individually, they're engaged. Now, collectively, with other colleagues, when they get together, they come up with consensual opinions on needs that need to be met in their own field and on the best way of doing this. And this may be the outcome of workshops, or it could be the outcome of a lot of publications that are peer reviewed, and eventually they're distilled into these are the best practices. This is how we can make our field more effective, more efficient. But yet, in decision making, there isn't a path for that knowledge to go to the decision makers. And the decision makers, human beings like everybody else, may be very good in what they do, but they have huge vacuums of knowledge of many of the fields upon which they're going to make decisions. So it would be good to have a mechanism through which that knowledge that resides at institutes, at universities, at centers with professional societies could be channeled towards decision making. Not everybody, of course, as Jean-Jacques said, it would be very naive to think that we could have a panacea of how an ideal world might work, but mechanisms that would help channel that knowledge that is in these enclaves, in these islands of the various fields, professional fields, disciplines that exist. And I will leave it at that. I fully agree with the comments that were made by Ken, by Dan, and Jean-Jacques. We have quite a job ahead of us if we're going to make any progress. And of course, as Ken said, we're all converted. So now we look at things from the civil society point of view. That's quite a therapist we had.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for those brilliant responses. I'll now be heading over to the second question, which borders on the legal side. which says, while the body of international space law and practice instruments have been established and serve as a roadmap for national security, civil and commercial space activities, legal scholars and scientists often dictate that much work needs to be done to the national level to give effect to the implementation of obligations under the space treaties of the United Nations. What work do you believe needs to be done to establish a sound and conducive legal framework for the advancement of space activities? And do you believe this framework will need to be implemented on a global or on a national scale? Ken, we'll start with you.
Thank you. What I'd like to do for this question is talk a little bit about what we need to do and kind of the nature of the treaties. I think Jean-Jacques had alluded to this. The treaties are very flexible. They're permissive. There are only a few things that you can't do in space. Primarily you can't appropriate the outer space, the moon, out of the celestial bodies. You can't place weapons of mass destruction in space. Can conduct tests, which is covered under another treaty. You can't put military installations on the moon. So the treaties are all state-based. Unlike other international law, the state is ultimately responsible for whatever its nationals do in space. So it's a little unique there. So that means necessarily that these new countries that are getting involved in space need to have in place the proper processes to ensure that their entities, non-governmental entities, are operating in conformance with the outer space treaties. And what they put into place needs to be transparent in order for other countries or companies to cooperate with those entities. So you have to have transparency at the national level, not only for the entities within that jurisdiction, but for others coming in. And I think we'll get to that particular notion later. But the work that needs to be, there is work that needs to be done at the national level. And in my view, there are some fundamental concepts in the treaties that need to be that need to be fleshed out and discussed. Now, there's great debates about what is national appropriation, what's not, what's peaceful uses, what's not, which is common, the whole idea of the common heritage, shared resources, all of those things. So those are interesting, but they don't get to the real heart of things. And basically what we have to focus on is Article 6. And Article 6 is about supervision and authorization. So those are two concepts. You have to authorize the activities of your nationals in space, and you have to provide continuing supervision. And how is that done? And I think looking at that would be instructive for the global space community, inside government and outside government. The same goes for Article 8. Article 8 is, again, a fundamental issue here, because under Article 8, it deals with registering space objects. And when you register a space object under Article 8, you assert that you have control and jurisdiction over those objects. Now, that was simple when you had two launching states, the US and the Soviet Union. But when you have multiple launching states sending into orbit objects belonging to entities outside of their control, the question is, once that satellite is in orbit, who has jurisdiction and control over that? The launching state under the treaties is the final kind of place to go. So everything revolves around the launching state and the physical place from which the object was launched. But as we've seen, it's impracticable. It's impractical to think that, say, Russia launching a US satellite into orbit would be perpetually liable for its operations when something happens 10 or 15 years ago. So it comes down to, in my view, how do you provide that control and jurisdiction? So if something does go wrong, you know who to go to and you know who's responsible for that. Even though under the Outer Space Treaty, it's the launching state, but in my view, it's the state of registry that ultimately needs to take steps to control and have jurisdiction over those objects. And then the third article I think is crucial is the whole idea in Article 9 of harmful interference and contamination. Now, these are two different issues. Interference, there's no definition of what the interference is. It leaves it up to a state. It leaves it up to a state to think that they might be interfered with, or a state that thinks what they might do will interfere with another. You know, what do we do on the moon if we have two mining operations? One under the control and jurisdiction of one group, another under control and jurisdiction of another. What is interference? We don't know that. Harmful contamination, going to a celestial body, contaminating that celestial body, or coming back and potentially bringing things back that would contaminate the Earth. Right now, we have COSPAR protocols. Those are not binding. They reflect the best thinking on the part of the scientific community, but they're not regulations. And so we've had instances, or I've had at least one instance, two instances, if you will, of companies that want to go to the moon or to Mars, and they're not quite sure how they're going to comply with this whole notion of planetary protection, because they have to put in a huge amount of time and effort to decide if something is going to be possibly contaminating another celestial body. And there's no real national legislation that deals with that. Although we have the Office of Planetary Protection in NASA, we have the COSPAR guidelines. But if you tell a company, okay, just take these guidelines and figure out how it might work and then come back to us. And then what they don't want is 30 days out from launch going to Mars saying, oh yeah, actually this planetary protection plan isn't so great because we think that the Martians are going to be contaminated. So those are three things when you talk about here in your question, Abdullah, about the implementation of obligations at the national level. These have profound effects on what happens at the international level, and I do agree that this is another issue that we have to look at when we talk about this framework, this global framework, and what are the things that go into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. Wonderful response. Dan?
Well, thank you. I unfortunately, I'm a reformed bureaucrat and also a reformed engineer and program manager. So I'm not quite, I'm afraid I'm going to be coming at this from a little bit different perspective and not as well educated as the other panelists on this topic. But I would echo a lot of what Ken said in the sense that assuring that we have a clear understanding of what the expectations are, of what interference means, who owns what, and who's responsible for what, and when and where those responsibilities lie, I think is extremely important. And also the ability to hold people accountable or to hold entities accountable for how they act or not act per the agreed upon rules and guidelines of what is set up. I think that's going to be extremely important, particularly as we get into more of these tangible mining operations on the moon, mining operations on an asteroid, settlements on different planetary bodies for economic reasons, and for other reasons. I think we need to get these rules of the road developed and clearly understood, and understand how accountability lies. And that's an international as well as a national level. And I will even take a little bit of what Ken said and expand it from a U.S. perspective, in the sense that these are not easy things to do. You talk in terms of space traffic management and some of those issues, even within the United States, only recently out of the National Space Council and the approval of the previous presidential administration did we get an understanding of who was going to be responsible for the space traffic management activities of the United States. And that can change based on how a presidential administration or the government changes its priorities and activities. So I think there's a lot of unknown there, and we have to recognize that at the national level, getting these issues clarified and understood and agreed upon is going to be challenging in and of itself, as well as, and in parallel, developing the international agreements that are so essential, so that when it comes time to build these systems and put these systems in place, we have clear expectations of what needs to be done and who needs to do it. I think we have challenges ahead, and they are big challenges, and it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of work across the entire ecosystem to be able to get the answers that we need when we need them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Now, Jean-Jacques, I'd like to turn it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Abdulla. I will elaborate along the lines previously drawn by Ken and Dan. Actually, it's a fact, it's a reality that that it's up to national states to translate into their national regulation and law I would say the agreements that have been found at multilateral level. And definitely, I think that this was a driver at the time. The whole setup has been defined, that states want to remain fully sovereign in the conduct of their space activities. Now, would we, I would say, redo this setup from scratch? Would we do the same? I don't know. Can we change this? I don't believe so, because this is a major requirement from many players. Now, the problem that we have is, as I said in my initial statement, is this issue of consistency. And what I think we should really work on and consider is how we could converge on our interpretation, understanding of this legal framework. And on this, I would say, sadly, at the moment, we don't have much. Actually, okay, we have the COPUOS where we discuss, where we negotiate, but there is nowhere where we can train people, where we can, I would say, also educate them, where we can offer them a forum where they could exchange with their counterparts from other regions of the world. And definitely COPUOS is not meant for that, although it's a good place for discussions, but it's not meant for that. And I would suggest this as maybe a step forward in this direction, setting up such a group, a forum for discussion and exchange, informal, on the basic principles and the way to best translate them into national regulation. That's for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Sergio.
Well, I would like to focus on an idea that comes from looking at what we have as existing space law and principles and guidelines. So we have on one side treaties, which are binding, that if there's any controversy, then it's actually for those that are party to the treaty. If you want to change anything because you don't agree, it's only those that are party to the treaty, it's not everybody. So on the other side, we have what has evolved the last 20, 30 years, principles and guidelines that are non-binding. Now, I happen to believe that these principles and guidelines that are non-binding are something very good to work with to include into national legislation. First, a few words on what non-binding means. For me, non-binding means that whatever issue is being discussed is carried as much forward as giving as much teeth as possible, because the governments that are negotiating it know that it's non-binding, so they can go a little bit farther. Was it to be binding, then to agree on something, everybody would be saying, oh, but we need to take this out. Somebody else says, we need to take this out. We need to take that out. And pretty soon you end up with something so bland that you might as well not have anything. If it's non-binding, then governments are willing to go a little bit farther, and you can have some fairly sound legally and scientifically guidelines. They take a long time to agree upon. But once you've agreed upon them as a government, the ones that I'm familiar with are worked out in COPUS. COPUS works by consensus. So it doesn't mean that by accepting a guideline, I believe in that guideline. It's just, I don't oppose it, but I don't really believe in it. So I'm not going to translate that into my national legislation. But there are others that I believe in. And I think those could be brought into the national legislation. And if we had many governments doing the same thing, putting the guidelines that or principles that they believe in or supported, and including them in their national legislation, we would have more harmony among national legislations across a larger number of, we have some harmony right now, of course, but this would include more issues, and it would include probably more countries. And that would create, I think, a field of some actors, some of the older actors and the newcomers, where some of the issues that are now being touched upon with developing commercialization and exploration opportunities to explore. Let's see, the phrasing didn't come out very well. That would create a, I think, a field of players where some of the issues of involved in commercialization and the exploration could be discussed, and common in the sense of common acceptance, rules or possible rules, maybe more guidelines would emerge, so that some of the activities could be carried out with the companies or even the governments having certainty that by investing in X, Y, or Z activity, they're not going to be surprised by a great opposition of coming from the international community, because there would have been this harmony increased among national legislations that that exist. And right now there isn't very much in national legislation. Very few countries have included into their national legislation some of the guidelines and principles that they have supported in their development process of these guidelines and principles. So I think there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done at the national scale to have an impact on the global scale.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Now, this next question was touched upon and slightly answered in all of your presentations, actually, but I'd like to ask it to get a more in-depth answer from all of you, and that is, the private sector needs a global framework that is transparent, level, and predictable. Now, do you believe this can only happen with a bottom-up approach that relies on the advice and experience of civil society with industry practices enshrined in national regulation, or should be accomplished via a top-down approach with a global agreement of rules and standards? If it's the latter, what are the crucial rules and standards that you believe need to be in place for the highest chance of success? Ken, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Abdulla. I just wanted to go back to the question that we just addressed, and it feeds into this one as well, but it occurred to me, the whole discussion about the implementation of obligations under the treaties, and what I talked about concerning Articles 6, 8, and 9, those go to the heart of a level playing field. So if you have a highly regulated system within which one entity has to operate, and their competitor is operating under almost no guidance or supervision, and doesn't have to comply with certain things that might cost them money, that's not level. So you can also use this concept of the national implementation of the treaties, not only is complying with international law, but also with the whole notion of that is part of the level playing field, is treating people the same through your domestic legislation. Now, for this third question, I'd like to maybe take a little different approach right now. Dan hit on a new concept which hadn't occurred to me, which I think is a great idea, and that is accountability. So accountability isn't liability, it's not necessarily responsibility, it's whom do you go to if something does go wrong? How accountable are you for the services that you provide? Now, what's interesting is that we have four government-provided services right now in the form of providing weather satellite data, global navigation satellite, navigation and positioning signals, SSA, where we provide all of the information on the positions of objects globally, and another system called COSPAR SARSAT, which is the satellite-aided search and rescue program operated by France, Canada, the US, and Russia. Now, in all four of those cases, we provide these services for for safety of life, for economic benefit, and and the like, and for satellite operations. But we don't guarantee the reliability of those services. So you use those at your own risk. And if you depend on that information and for whatever reason it doesn't work, no one's accountable, basically. And we've had case law before on services provided by the US government that didn't work, and basically the courts, at least domestically, ruled, okay, that that up front. So when we talk about the global agreements, rules, and standards, is there an accountability issue here? Particularly for the private operators. If the private systems are becoming, people are becoming more and more reliant on them, what is the accountability there? And I'm not suggesting that we interfere with a business model, but it is an interesting idea, because there probably are things that are outside of the treaties that would need to be addressed in terms of accountability, insurance, those sorts of things. And is there something new that's coming up that doesn't, again, fit into what we know of today? And I don't suggest that would be a good top-down approach. That would be more industry organizing itself to look at these sorts of things as kind of a preemptive strike before the governments impose their views on what it should be. So, for example, we have the International Standards Organization that sets standards across multiple types of industries, but they do have it for space. Dan is quite aware, because I think AIAA is the representative to the ISO. If I'm not mistaken, is not an intergovernmental organization, but it does set standards, and it's a bottom-up approach, and it's the best information from experts in industry as well as in government. And so that would be another model to look at. How would industry come together and, as I say, okay, there are these gaps, and while it would be easy just to ignore them until something happens, maybe we should grab the bull by the horns and start looking at, okay, what would we like to see? What would make our lives a lot better? Because when you start talking about rules and standards, that has to be bottom up, in my view, because it's not necessarily an exclusive function of government. So that's kind of the way I would look at this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. Dan, your response.
Well, I think Ken's made some good points, particularly on the bottoms up and using the standards, because it's really clear that for the private sector to be successful, they have to understand the risks. They have to know what investments they need to make to address the risks, and those have to be accounted for in their business plans. And the more uncertainty there is around those risks, be those policy, legal, business risks, whatever, the harder it is to make the business case close. So it's important to get those. It's important to get this understanding transparent and predictable, as the question points out. I think it's actually a mixture of the approaches, and I think Ken added a good third one in with the standards thought process. He is correct. The ISO the involvement is not from a government perspective. Another important factor in that standards process is not only is it bottoms up, it is also consensus. So you have to achieve some level of agreement to be able to implement the standards. Now, we have practice doing that on all kinds of fronts. We are doing in the space business. We have done that with the International Space Station on a couple of activities, docking adapters and other things that I think we have models to work from that are all important. So I think we ought to look at those models. and also recognize that at some point we're going to need to be able to handle the global agreements and the global rules, and how we get those developed and implemented will all be important. But I think we can take advantage of, from a private sector perspective, we can certainly use the standards approach as a key element.
Thank you so much, Dan. Jean-Jacques, your response.
Yeah, thank you, Abdulla. I think that yeah, if you want the private sector to thrive in the space sector, there are a few conditions that need to be met. The first one is the issue of leveling the playing field, and the reason and the rationale behind that is also to ensure the fairness of the competition that that might rise between the various service providers around the globe. At the moment, this is really an open question. How to ensure such fairness, I have really no clue. But the fact is that the notion that probably we need to work on is the notion of space commerce. I was enthusiastic about this creation of the US Office for Space Commerce. I'm still surprised how long it took before we invented this concept of space commerce, and I'm still surprised that nobody followed this path. And I'm at the moment advocating for Europe to also to move along this way. And this notion of space commerce is something which is needs to be invented, so there are many things that we could include in there. But the key issue that I would like to say is that in this, definitely the private sector should have a big say. At the moment, they have none or not enough, in my views. And second is that along the space commerce, we must also think of the situation in which we will need to arbitrate disputes, commercial disputes, purely commercial disputes, that might arise between various providers. Well, this is just food for thought. I will not try or even challenge myself in coming up with a proposal for that, but I think that there is still a lot to do.
Thank you so much, Jean-Jacques. And lastly, Sergio.
There, unmuted myself again. Well, I think we need both a bottom-up and top-down combination. If we're looking at the private sector, we need to keep in mind that not everything that the private sector tries to do is necessarily good. Just because it's the private sector doesn't mean that what they're doing is good. So we need to have the private sector abide by existing rules and standards. The rules and standards were arrived at through a lot of work, and it provides for some type of stability and a level playing field. And in this, I would just like to give an example of what is going on right now. There's a company that is a US-based company, and that company has received from the FCC authorization to use part of the spectrum that is next to where the GNSS spectrum is. That spectrum is worth a lot of money. So with that ruling, this company has some degree of certainty that they can invest and provide services that could maybe infringe on the capability of GNSS being used in the US to the level that it is being used right now. Now there are rules that have been set by the ITU as to what the level of any potential harmful interference should have to be allowed at the international level. So for what is being done in the US, that would, for the time being, not apply. So companies from the US would not have the same type of rules. They would not be following the same type of rules as companies from other countries. And even their investment of this company is not really secure yet because it has a lot of opposition from, on one hand, experts, and on the other hand, departments of the US itself. Department of Defense is against it. It seems like members of Congress are also against it. Now, what is going to happen, we don't know. But there is no certainty even for this company. So that what is going to happen there is still pretty much in the air. But it's because we're also not having this company abide by existing rules and regulations. Somebody should have told, actually in this case, it's the FCC that should have told that company, no, you can't do it because of this. On the other hand, from the bottom-up approach, I think I won't repeat what I said before in a couple of my intervention, is that we need the advice and experience of companies, private sector, but also of professional societies who have been working on issues and have come to certain agreements of what are best practices, what should be done, and that should be considered in the practice of setting rules, common rules, not necessarily legal standards, but practice of what is going to be accepted by the, I guess, the international community, including the private sector and the government sectors, so that there isn't a surprise later that the companies start along a certain line and all of a sudden the government says, oops, no, you have to follow these rules. So there has to be a bottom-up approach as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Now, on to question 4. Are you of the belief that the rule of law in space must be flexible, inclusive, and permissive for the next generation of space exploration to excel? Now, looking at the current trajectory of space activities, do you think countries and companies transitioning towards the new global space economy will need an unbiased and thoughtful institution that looks at the totality of the challenges ahead? And what kind of obligations and responsibilities do you think this institution will be tasked with? Ken, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Abdullah. I think there are a couple of points I want to make concerning this question. The first one goes to the question within the question. What kind of obligations and responsibilities do you think this institution will be tasked with? I'm hoping that this panel and future panels will stimulate thought, among the new actors in space as to what the institute could do for them, and so I would view this as an available venue for groups of actors who want a place where they can speak to specific issues, rather than, again, having to do it through the filter of the government. I think anonymity or Chatham House rules will be very important in concerning this particular question about having some place where they get unbiased and thoughtful look at things, because many companies might have some good ideas, but what they don't want to do is anger their future government contractees. I mean, they might have a view that doesn't coincide with their own governments. It might still be a really good view, but what they don't want to do is get crosswise. So not only would it have to be unbiased, it would have to be for particular issues. It may have to be, again, Chatham House rules, so that we have a free flow of ideas that could be exchanged, with the understanding that's providing informed opinions on future things. So that would be one aspect of it. The other thing is, an unbiased platform. It will be crucial that we don't have the perception that there is some kind of government or groups of governments trying to push a particular view. So that, again, necessarily means we have to ask people, what would you be interested in? It occurred to me there's this really interesting phenomenon that we were looking at. It took us, 60 years to get to the rather eclectic group of launching states. And as I mentioned before, everything flows to the launching state. New Zealand is the most recent entrant to the launching state community. My office worked extensively with them on what it takes for them to put into place national legislation and what understandings they needed between the US government and New Zealand in order for Rocket Lab to launch from New Zealand. Now, that was a torturous process, but that, again, was an example of an idea that outpaced government. We had to catch up. So now we have the potential of the UK becoming a launching state, Canada, Australia. I've read maybe Romania with I think there's an ocean-launched rocket that they're looking at. But how do we have an understanding among those launching states as to how they will behave and what the rules are that they might not impose but insist on for payloads to be launched on their rockets? I mean, do they insist that there have to be debris mitigation plans for these large constellations that are launched? That is, if the US were launching a large constellation operated by a foreign entity, would we say you have to have a debris mitigation plan before we give you the FAA license, which the FAA already requires a debris mitigation plan, but it's only for the rocket operation, and that's it. So maybe states just entering into the space arena could see this as a place that they could go unencumbered by the political back and forth that you get in the United Nations. Again, not to replace them, but perhaps we offer this up to them. The other development now is point-to-point transportation, going up into space, not orbiting the Earth, so it doesn't become a space object, but going up and then coming back down. Now, the only thing that does that are ICBMs. And they traverse they traverse space, but they aren't covered by the Outer Space Treaty because they aren't something that goes into orbit. So what are the legal implications there? Is space law the determinant factor, or is air law? I don't know, but I know, I mean, I'm engaged on my own on, another project dealing with point to point, but we already have a plan for it, a commercial plan, Starship, owned by SpaceX. We don't know. Is this something that needs to be taken up in what we call a kind of an unbiased, neutral arena, or is it going to be taken up solely as a question of domestic law? I have no idea. 3D printing. The people that are engaged in that. If you 3D print things in space, when do they become a space object? When the material is launched, or when it's actually built in space? I don't know. But those would be kind of the examples of where you need some kind of readily available platform that you can go to and ask, hey, here are some things that I would like to be looking at, or that need to be considered. So I took it in a little bit different direction, but I'll let the others here take it from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Dan, your response.
My response is it's certainly flexible and inclusive is essential, and we've talked about that from a couple of perspectives already today. I would point out that one of the key reasons for that to be flexible and inclusive is we can't know where this is all going to go at this point in the game. If you look at human history around the globe, we have learned a lot, moved a lot, changed a lot, and that's where the flexibility, there's no reason to think that this is going to be any different in space, because there is certainly an awful lot up there that we don't know yet. We have to be a little humble about the idea of how much we really know about living and working on the moon and in other places. So certainly need the flexibility. And I think whatever entity, I certainly think we need to have the ability to have the kind of discussions, to have the frank and open discussions, as Ken pointed out. And I think it most certainly needs to be inclusive, particularly to maintain that unbiased aspect to it. It's very easy. One of the key things we have to intentionally guard against and to be very, very diligent about is making sure that we retain the unbiased aspect. So that means the various stakeholders involved, the different perspectives involved, constantly asking questions and being curious about what do we not know that we need to go search out and learn about. So I certainly agree that we need flexibility, and we need to be able to handle what changes, and we need to make sure that unbiased is built in intentionally into however we go about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Jean-Jacques, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I would be very, very quick on that. Definitely, I'm fully in line with what Dan said regarding flexibility. And I think that as far as exploration is concerned, I think that this should be really a driver. Flexibility, inclusiveness are definitely the two driver that should be kept at the very top of the exploration agenda. And I do believe that that once again, when we narrow down the scope to exploration related activities, I think that the existing current setup that have been put in place is still quite appropriate, and I'm I believe that for the time being, maybe further developments might bring us to considering different ways of dealing with space exploration ventures. But for the time being, I would still see it as quite relevant and appropriate. I think that this is for the time being, I would say, enough in order to preserve this inclusivity and permissiveness. So in terms of obligations and responsibilities, I would say just one thing I might ask is the potential pollution or contamination of aerospace bodies that should be dealt with as a major concern. But I think that having all of this handled at national level, the way it is framed currently in our setup is appropriate. I don't see any pressing need to really think of a different setup. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Sergio.
Yes, I would looking at that question instead of looking at rule of law. I would look at governance in space because it's broader. And in that case, then I would be of the opinion that it should be flexible and inclusive. I don't know too much about the permissive part. It depends. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. The thing that I believe, could benefit from having would be maybe not an institution, but platform where issues could be looked at in all aspects. I like the idea that Ken proposed of having it be something that follows Chatham House rules, so that all ideas could be discussed. But I don't know if we need to have an institution that can do everything. Perhaps a platform where we could have all the relevant actors on a particular issue. If we're looking at space debris, then anybody that has a stake in the governance of space debris on the issue. We don't want to have a place where everybody is like-minded. We need to have a discussion that will eventually take into consideration the different backgrounds of all the participants. Why do they look at it as restrictive? That might be the case for new entrants. I think, well, when you did it, you developed this way, but now you don't want me to develop that way. Well, they need to be convinced if you develop that way, then you would be harming space as a whole, and then it would not be available for any of us, including you. Such type of conversations. But I do believe that it should be flexible and inclusive, and the permissiveness would probably be something that would be discussed, would be an issue itself that would be discussed in this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Now, on to question 5. What do you think needs to be done for the future of space activities in the following sectors: finance, insurance, and multimedia space ventures? As always, Ken, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Abdulla. Well, I think these are three areas. I mean, I'm not an expert in any of the three, so I'm kind of looking at it just as a first of all as a general point of interest, but then secondly, again, taking this out of the envelope approach. And so when we look at the space enterprise as it is today, everything has been, from a commercial standpoint, been fairly, what would be the word, fairly predictable. I mean, we have the geostationary orbit, where the operators of the telecommunication satellites know what they need for insurance. The insurance industry, it has all of this down. I mean, there was a big change in terms of insurance when the United States stiffened up the OCTAR regulations, and insurance companies, in order to underwrite the satellites, had to do much more work to comply with technology safeguard protection plans, the data that they had from the manufacturer before that period was much more freely available. Now it's not. And the insurance industry had to adjust in a rather substantial way and spend a lot of its own money putting into place technology safeguard or technology protection plans, getting security clearances for people in order to do the analysis for underwriting. So what would insurance, and then we have the launch insurance industry as well. Again, that's fairly standard stuff as far as I can tell. But what if we're looking at the operations on the moon, commercial operation? What would go into that analysis? I think, again, that's way off, but it would be an interesting discussion on what would be the factors that would have to be looked into. What would be the role of the government? I mean, maybe the governments end up underwriting all of this. I'm not sure, or maybe it would simply be a strict commercial, commercial endeavor with the need for insurance. The financing, Dan and John, well, all four of us remember back in the 80s when the whole notion of commercial activities in space started really to take off. The interest in commercial launch, the telecommunications, taking the monopolies away from Intelsat and Inmarsat, created this whole new pool of venture capital, and that has only grown today. Now, what would be, and there are specific mechanisms in place that the venture capitalists have in place for the current operation. What happens? What would be new forms of finance in the future? I think of, and this is where we would want international private law experts involved. I mean, today there's an international organization called UNIDROIT. It's headquartered in Rome. It's the last organization of the League of Nations, believe it or not. And this organization deals in international private law and kind of the harmonization or standardization of international private law. They have a protocol on space where you can use space assets, whether it's a transponder or a satellite itself, as collateral for loans. Now, it's non-binding, but it is an interesting idea because the concept was to open up another venue or another avenue for capital. That is, being able to use things that you cannot physically repossess if the lendee defaults on their loan. So maybe that's something else that could be looked at. On the multimedia, again, the question for me is the multimedia for the future of what we do in space strictly a function of entertainment, or is it a function of entertainment and being informative? And this will get to the next question about the new young entrepreneurs. I mean, on the one hand, again, I come back to Star Trek. It inspired a lot, a whole generation of people, and a lot of people did go in. A lot of people wanted to be astronauts, go into NASA, go into Kenneth or any other space agency. to be part of the space age. What is it that's being done today in multimedia? And is there something that is there something that can be looked at between the multimedia sector, commercial sector, government sector, scientific sector, to exchange ideas on what they think is useful, what works, what doesn't work, in terms of using multimedia to promote space? Going to the moon is going to be a hard sell to the governments around the world's publics, to their taxpayers. We need to convince people of the benefits of that. Now, if a space agency puts together a great PR pamphlet on why it makes sense to go to the moon, the natural reaction is, well, they're only doing it for their own purposes. But we've got to be convinced in a different way. So how would multimedia play a role in something like that? So those are kind of my general ideas. I still think these are good ideas to kind of flesh out. And again, I hope the audience is able to get back to the Institute with some ideas in this area, as well as all the other areas that we talked about. And I'll hand.
Thank you so much, Ken. Dan, what do you think of the following sectors in the space activity in the future?
Well, I think they're all going to be part of the future. There's no doubt about that. I think I too am not an expert in any of these fields, but I do see them all playing a key role in the future, which actually goes back to some of the points we've made earlier in terms of predictability for these sectors to thrive, an understanding of accountability, and what are the rules of the road. I think certainly from a finance perspective, that's needed, because that's all about risk management. Insurance is all about risk management and who's accountable for what, and what is the statistically significant probability of anything occurring, which plays straight into their risk assessments. So these are all going to be fundamental sectors to furthering the space economy, whatever that turns out to be in the future. And I think these are key activities that we should spend some time getting some key experts in. And I think that is something that the Hague Institute could do in the future, is to have some focused conversations of what needs to be done in these areas to further their involvement in the space economy down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Jean-Jacques, your thoughts on the following sectors?
Yeah, thank you, Abdulla. Well, I will start by maybe putting aside the multimedia space ventures that I see more as a business. But when it comes to finance and insurance, there is no doubt that they have a key role to play, and they are essential to the future development, whatever it is, of the space sector. Actually, these communities usually do not call for major regulation, and I guess the less the governments and institutions are interfering in their domain, and I would say the better. The one thing which I believe they would expect in order to really considering positively further investing in themselves in the space sector is, and this was said by speakers before me, stability and predictability. So actually having a stable and predictable framework for space activities is certainly a necessary condition. And I must say that I was quite concerned by some announcement that were made recently by some insurance company that it would step down from the space insurance. So predictability and stability, okay, this is a matter, of course, of regulation and legal framework, but it also has some more concrete and technical implications. And what's at stake here, I guess, is the security and safety in outer space. There can be no bright future if the concerns that are currently growing regarding the risks associated with the debris and other kind of potential threats continue to grow in the future. And I would see this as an emergency. We need to build up the confidence of the financial sector and of insurance companies, their confidence in the future and of the space sector. And for that, we must absolutely make sure that all the conditions are met in order to mitigate any uncontrolled development of risks or threats. And I think that this is a role to be played by governments and institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean-Jacques. And Sergio, your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I will begin with the third one of those, multimedia. Because on one hand, the biggest business for communications satellites actually is the entertainment sector. So there are very large amounts of money that are being put in by entertainment companies, and that relates to that first part, the finance. So it is something to be looked at as far as behavior. How do we operate, keep operating, and maybe even in a more productive way, these companies that are using space just as a medium to convey entertainment for which a lot of people are willing to pay money. And there's another aspect that comes with multimedia, and that's influence on opinion, both on governments and industry and other sectors of the global economy. They have a big impact on these. If you remember in the small example that I gave about getting participation of the private sector in Mexico involved in financing activities related to outer space. The one of the factors that was very important both for government and for companies was the publicity that the launching of a small satellite by a university group, the UPAEP that I had listed there. They launched, in collaboration with NASA, they launched a CubeSat. And that got a lot of coverage in the media. And because it got a lot of coverage, government, the local government, the state government was interested. And because of the coverage, the companies were interested. So whatever happens in the multimedia space ventures has a huge potential for influencing at least attention and maybe raising awareness. In the finance part, I think for the future, not looking at the ones that we have right now, there is much to be looked at. If we're going to be looking at how are some of the missions to the moon and eventually to Mars going to be financed? To Mars, we might have a multi-billionaire that is going to finance at least an operation to go to Mars, but it's not going to be done by one individual, no matter how rich that individual is. It's going to be a very expensive proposition, and there has to be a business plan that says there is going to be a payoff for the investment. So there will be a lot of work to be done, I think, in the area of finance, both looking at how to provide some stability and certainty, and at the same time, what is it that is going to be commercially important? It's one thing to have a colony and to show that human beings can live on the moon or on Mars and do research. But it's another thing from a private sector point of view is, okay, besides the publicity that I get for having been one of the companies that financed, what can I benefit from? What tangible good am I going to be able to commercialize here on Earth or in space? It can be commercialized in space as well, but it has to compensate for whatever investments I'm going to make. And I think that is a whole virgin territory. I don't know how many companies or institutes have looked at the issue, but I would think that there is much that could be done in different platforms for to discuss that issue and how it relates. I think the three have links. I'm not an expert on any of the three. It's just what I have picked up from the news media mainly, but there will be an interrelation between those three items that we have in this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Now, question number 6 was touched on slightly by Ken in his answer to question number 5 when he said, Star Trek inspired a whole generation. So my question is, being of the younger generation, what are the challenges for the young space entrepreneurs? Ken, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Abdulla. Well, I think that for the young entrepreneurs there are, I think, many challenges in the sense that when you start looking at the trade press or even LinkedIn, you see so many new ventures that are coming up, very small companies that are doing things in space or want to do things in space. And in my view, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that they have an understanding of the whole process by which they will have to go through. So if you're an entrepreneur building an instrument for a satellite, no, that's pretty straightforward. If you're an entrepreneur that wants to build rockets that launch small sats in the future, again, like Rocket Lab. Now, that's not a young entrepreneur, that's somebody with a lot of money, but anyways, they need to understand all the steps quite aside from their education as a scientist or technologist or an engineer, they need to understand the totality of that process, from conceiving the idea through the financing, through the regulations, and ultimately through whatever operations that they might be engaged in. And this is important, I think, not only for young entrepreneurs who are maybe starting up their own businesses, but the young entrepreneurs or people that are absorbed into the larger corporations. You know, my experience of the State Department, you know, there was with many of these larger companies, there was kind of a lack of understanding on these nuances of the outer space treaties. Not that it's not a criticism, because that's really not really their job about the treaties, but then with the commercial sector changing so radically on a global basis, they got captured by these debates on who's going to register a satellite, who's not going to register a satellite. And so I would like to see also this same culture in the larger companies about understanding from the beginning what it takes. Now, obviously, they know almost everything that's of relevance to them, but there are these things that we've been talking about the frameworks, transparent framework, how can we help them out? So they're going to have to look beyond just their own sphere, if you will, of what they want to do, but there's a larger community that they need to interact with. So a young entrepreneur, as they move through, as they become older, move up the ladder, either within their own company or in larger companies. If we create this culture of entrepreneurship, and the culture of entrepreneurship is not only having big ideas and pursuing them, but also realizing that there's a whole nother there's a whole nother set of actors that they may or may not have to deal with in terms of making all of this happen. And so a discussion of bringing in young entrepreneurs. I mean, I follow on LinkedIn someone launching from Scotland. I'd be fascinated to know launching sounding rockets. I'd be fascinated to know what was their process? How did they do this? How can they share that experience with others? Bring in people who've made it up, started as young entrepreneurs, made a very successful career. What is it that they learned? So I think the challenge for the young entrepreneurs is being able to ask questions, knowing where to go, having a venue to engage in these kinds of analysis on the overall space economy, what's going on there. What are the resources out there? I mean, AIAA is one resource. I think Dan and I were talking. I was kind of surprised that over my career, I have dealt with people who do not know what AIAA is. They know everything else about space. So maybe we need to look at organizations like AIAA and what they're doing for the young entrepreneurs. How can they interact? Have a grouping of these organizations where they can interact with young people and who are aspiring to get into to enter the space economy. So I will hand that over to.
Thank you so much, Ken. And on that note, since we discussed the AIAA, can we move over to Dan and see his thoughts on what are the challenges to young space entrepreneurs?
I'll be happy to. And just for the record, I did not pay Ken to say that. Ken makes a really good point, and that's one of the reasons we talk about things like Ascend that we do at AIAA, is to bring those young entrepreneurs together, bring those new markets together, to look at the opportunities. I'm going to change the word challenge into opportunity, because in those challenges is the opportunity to go address needs, which means markets, which means the ability to put a business case together to solve problems for humans. So if you look at things like the companies like D-Space and Astroscale that are out there working on the space debris issue and what they can do, they're taking that challenge of addressing the space debris problem and turning that into a business opportunity. And that's what we want to do with AIAA, with our things, with our events such as Ascend and other workshops, is to bring the people together to work on those challenges, identify those challenges, bring those challenges together, pass the lessons learned around, like Ken talks about, so that the next step can be successful. We all have to realize that in the course of our careers, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And so we owe it to the next generation to help give them the foundation, help give them some lessons learned, let them go address the challenges because they're going to take it to the next level. And I think there are many opportunities out there for them to address these challenges. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of things we don't know that we have to learn along the way. But the intelligence, the enthusiasm, the passion that you see every day in the next generation tells me that I'm highly confident they'll be able to take on the challenges and build towards a great future. And professional societies like AIAA and all the ones Sergio mentioned and others are all there to help the next generation succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Jean-Jacques, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Abdulla. Well, actually, I would just like to comment a bit further on what was said by both Dan and Ken, and actually Ken made a very valid point about providing accurate information and extensive information about what's at stake and what it implies to really set up a space business, and many companies might really benefit from getting additional support or dedicated support for that. I would like just maybe to mention here very interesting initiative that was taken by the Secure World Foundation in issuing a booklet where they recap all the conditions and the obligations made by newcomers to the space business that might not be familiar with all our regulation and constraints. And this definitely would need to be further elaborated and maybe also considered or adapted at national level to better serve and better address the questions that might be raised by small companies. This is the first thing. Next, I would like also to make reference to a publication that we issue every year at SP, which is called Space Ventures Europe. And actually this publication is about the private investment in the space sector in Europe, and where we track and we identify a number of startups and new space companies, etc. But it's also based on a survey that we issue and that we address to all the companies which is in our portfolio, and we ask them, one of the questions we ask them is about what are the major challenges that we face at the moment. And surprisingly, all these startups and newcomers, they do not put forward technical issues. At the moment, if they want to re-enter the space domain, they did their work on the engineering and technical side, and this is not where they are seeking support. Surprisingly, again, it's not about access to finance. For the time being, there are plentiful of instruments available at institutional governmental level in Europe, and also there is a plentiful of private funds that are accessible to them. This might not last forever, but for the time being, the conditions are fine. But the main challenge that they face is really getting in touch with their potential customers. And this is, I think, where we could certainly maybe reflect on what kind of help, what kind of support we might be able to bring to them there. Maybe having a forum, maybe having, I don't know, a place where we could display the various innovative services that are territorial development or freshly made available. But there is certainly something here, and I would like to get back also to the framework of our discussion, which is about the civil society, and this has a lot to do also with the communication. Communicating towards the civil society about what space can do, what are the new possibilities, what are the new services, the new capacities that are made available to the greatest number of potential users, is certainly something that we should look into in greater detail. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Sergio, we'll go on to you.
Well, let's see. I would add the word after challenges. I would include opportunities. And I think that for young entrepreneurs in the space arena, many of the challenges will be what entrepreneurs in any other field need to face, challenges that they have. Like having a good business plan. That I think is, regardless of which field you're in, if you don't have a good business plan, the chances that you are successful are probably very small. So these are common things, not just to space. When we start getting into space, they should have a knowledge. This is a challenge. They have to acquire it. They're young. Knowledge of space issues that relate to the business ideas that they have. They may have only one, but they more likely don't have several business ideas. So which to pursue, and that depends on how rocky is the path that I'm going to be following for each of those ideas. So they need to learn about what are some of the space-related issues of their business that they need to be taking into account within their business plan. They, as any entrepreneur in any other field, need to establish a reputation of being serious, knowledgeable, and credibility of their idea. Now, I do keep finance as one of the challenges because, as may be the case in Europe, Jean-Jacques just mentioned Space Ventures Europe, and probably in the US, there may also be sources of finance. In most developing countries, there aren't these sources. So getting the finance support to be able to start the business is a challenge in itself. How we may be able to, we, the older generation, may be able to assist them would be, I think, by being able to present a portfolio of problems and issues within each of those problems that need to be solved. And this, I think, falls in the area of opportunities. And this is where young entrepreneurs in the space arena have an opportunity that is doesn't present itself to entrepreneurs in other areas. Everything is an unknown. There are more problems to solve than actual activities that are guaranteed. So their creative thinking can be stimulated by knowing what are the problems out there. We need to remove space debris. And these are the issues, and this is uh, the state of the art at this moment. These are the proposals that have been made, and these are maybe first attempts by some companies to do something. Well, they can be very creative and come up with other ideas, but they should know at least what is the state of the art, what are the issues uh, that I would need to solve in proposing my solution, and so on with many others. But I think that they would have a number of opportunities presented to them that entrepreneurs in other fields do not have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. And now we've reached the final question of this roundtable discussion. I wish I could ask you many more, but for today's event, this is what we have. And today's last question is, what do you think is the next major step in global space activities? And since it's the last question, we'll mix up the order a bit. Let's start off with Jean-Jacques this time.
Yeah, thank you, Abdulla. I will try to make my reply short. For me, the next major step is space traffic management, because actually this is something that we need. There is no alternative to that. We need absolutely to be able to ensure or to increase the security in orbit, to anticipate the risk of collisions, and to properly manage and coordinate all the maneuvers that might be necessary to avoid collisions. This is a necessary step. I have no doubt about that, and this should be envisioned, I would say, as much as possible on a global scale. Of course, it will be something that will be implemented through the delivery of services. It should be envisioned as a service to be provided to the space operators, and there should be a couple of service providers and maybe more, because it cannot be a monopoly, and I don't believe that it can be handled by government or governmental organizations. But definitely the services should as much as possible build on the broadest I would say set of data as possible, which definitely implies a kind of international cooperation in order to agree to share data on the various objects in orbit. So there are a number of challenges ahead from technical standpoints, but I have no doubt that this can be reasonably handled. Now, this is not the end of the story. It's not the day that we will be able to handle the space traffic management, that we will be able to handle the risk of collisions, that we will have solved the issue of security in orbit. Actually, in orbit, we have two kinds of objects: the maneuverable objects and the non-maneuverable. And space traffic management applies to the maneuverable objects. So luckily, there are also the ones having an economic value. But the risk of collisions between non-maneuverable objects, there is nothing we can do about it. And definitely, we must also think of what we might be able to do about that. So this could be first of all, the strict limitation of the creation of debris. And this is the easiest part of it. In a longer run, I guess that maybe active debris removal might become a necessity. For the time being, there is no economic rationale behind that, I believe, but this is something that we should continue working on, because I believe that in medium to long term, this will also become a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Sergio, we'll go on to you.
Thank you. I think it will be a balancing of the effects that some space activities have on other space activities. And it will, I think that will be the main problem that will need to be resolved. And this includes some of the areas that we have briefly touched on right now. Looking at the space debris issue, on one hand, we have companies that are going to be, I mentioned two, but there are more companies that are going to be launching huge clusters of satellites. Now, these are going to be creating possibilities of collisions. SpaceX and OneWeb, just this past week, within the last 8 days or so, had two other satellites practically collide. They came to within a couple hundred meters of each other. That in outer space is really, really, really close. And the clusters aren't anywhere close to what they're going to get to be. And one cluster is lower than the other cluster. So for the second one, they have to go through the zone where the first one is going to be putting more satellites. So that's one aspect of space debris. Now, the another aspect might be an opportunity. Can a company make it a business to, on contract, go and remove space debris? There are issues there about getting the authorization of the owner of the debris, whether it's a defunct satellite or a piece of metal. But can one finance that such that perhaps insurance companies contribute to whatever it's going to cost for a company to do a commercial operation at? Because their costs of insuring might come down, and they may have more clients. I get no. I'm just pointing that there could be a commercial interest to clean up some of the space debris. It could be also coming from the space agencies that will be launching. So there will be opportunities, but it's the effect that one activity has on another activity. And then balancing those, keeping the, trying to respect is not, maybe not, trying to not harm the activity of others, like astronomers. Astronomers are passively looking. Most of them are not launching. They use space assets. There are telescopes in space, but they're very expensive. So most astronomers use the data, but they need to have a clean sky in the visible and then the infrared. and in the radio waves at longer wavelengths. So as space gets used and from their point of view polluted, then the usefulness of space is reduced because of the activities of others. So these are the type of balancing, I think, that will need to be done. And I think that that will be the next major step. Can we step or challenge? Can we actually improve that interact, the influence, the bad influence from one group of activities, another group of activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Ken, we'll go to you.
Well, I've been giving this some thought, and I guess from my perspective, I think one of the biggest developments is exactly what we were doing here today, which is bringing kind of to the forefront that there needs to be a common vision for where we go in space. That doesn't necessarily mean that one direction, or that we have just one direction, but what is it we're trying to achieve? How do we use space in a practical way for benefit on Earth? But then how do we use space? And I don't want to say an impractical way, but the whole element of humans in space, and what does that mean as a general concept for humanity on Earth? And there's so much to that. There's a technological part, there's a philosophical part of this, of sending people to the moon once again, but having them stay there. There's the commercial, and I think they said the technological and the legal. So if we're going to be driven by two sectors, the commercial sector, which is doing things on their own, with some of them have considerable government support, some of them don't. They're pushing the envelope in terms of what needs to be looked at, what the practical benefits of what they're doing benefit people on Earth, because they want to make money. And then you have the government driven. What are the policies that are being put into place? And if we look at what governments are spending, the European Space Agency, NASA, JAXA, and the Canadian Space Agency are spending a lot of money on Artemis and this whole concept of having people on the moon, having Gateway, all of these things that are not, that don't make a direct connection to people's everyday lives, but can in some form or fashion. And what I'd like to say is, when, again, in my view, the next developments, we don't know what they are, but we know that they'll be big in some way. And when a person has this big idea, again, I'll use the example of going to an asteroid and bringing back platinum. It's a continuum of having the idea and getting to that destination. And we shouldn't be fixated on the destination, but all the intervening or intermediate steps that are taken, where they might decide, I'm not going to go to an asteroid. In fact, I've developed technologies that will make me money, but B, advance the space enterprise, just with that process of trying to get to an asteroid. And so what I see are big ideas coming out, driving the policy framework, and then necessarily making us make the case to the general public why space is beneficial, why permanent presence on the moon is beneficial, why going to Mars is beneficial, and all of the attendant issues that are there. So I wasn't going to pick a specific technology, but just generally the overall framework that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. And Dan, last but not least, your answer.
Well, thank you, Abdulla. I think, all of these suggestions and thoughts from Jean-Jacques, Sergio, and Ken I think are right on the mark. It's all of that. It's in my mind, it's getting the space economy up and running, helping the markets develop, helping the private sector succeed, and building what we need for all of society to be successful. Because as we make the economy more successful and we solve the problems of space debris and space traffic management, then we start to build the capability of reducing the risk and building the capability of being able to live and operate and make money in new markets. And then from there, we continue to build out again, where we'll explore even further, eventually humans from the moon out to Mars, and the economy will flow with it, just like exploration has occurred here on planet Earth from day one. So I think I look forward to a lot of great different efforts, and you see it going on in the community today, solving our hard problems like space debris and space traffic management, making the low Earth economy, space economy successful, then building that out to the moon, and continuing to, as I say it, move the human neighborhood further and further out. So lots of opportunity and lots of good challenges ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. I can't even begin to express how insightful and outstanding that roundtable discussion was. I mean, we learned a lot about the involvement of civil society in the future space enterprise, but at the same time, the steps that need to be taken to ensure the space sector stays the course. I mean, I'd like to express my sincerest gratitude to our wonderful keynote speakers for joining us today to share their thoughts on the matter. I mean, gentlemen, it has truly been a pleasure to have you. We at the Hague Institute for Global Justice work for the global community. We want to hear your ideas for roundtable discussions that you would like us to host, because you make the Institute what it is. We're also constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate with other entities and individuals. So if you have any ideas that you would like us to discuss for our next roundtable, or if you'd like to collaborate with the Hague Institute for Global Justice, please feel free to contact us at info@thehagueinstitute.org. From myself and the rest of the team at the Hague Institute for Global Justice, we thank you dearly for joining us for today's event. We hope you remain well and healthy, and we hope to see you next time. Ladies and gentlemen, good night and farewell.